The Blue Jackets are looking for a second first-round pick in the upcoming draft. There's a bunch of guys that they could take, but we're going to talk about one of those guys today on Locked On Blue Jackets.
You're Locked On Blue Jackets, your daily podcast on the Columbus Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Blue Jackets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am, as always, your host, Jay Foster, here to give you the good, the bad, and the ugly about your favorite team and mine, the Columbus Blue Jackets. Before we get started, I want to thank everyone for making this your first listen of the day every single day. Locked On Blue Jackets is free and available on all podcast platforms and over on YouTube. We're also on Sirius XM. And I also want to let you know that this episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers are going to get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 if your bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. And what we're going to get started today is we're going to keep going with the draft profiles. So we've had a look at a lot of guys who are going to be available in that 2 to 5 slot where the Blue Jackets are likely going to be drafting. But Blue Jackets are looking for a second first-round pick. They're probably going to be moving some assets out. Probably in the next couple of weeks as we get towards the trade deadline. So I thought, let's take a look at someone who could be available kind of a little bit later on in the draft. The Blue Jackets have had success with many of those kind of later first-round picks. And so I thought, let's take a look at one that I'm really excited about, and that is Michael Brandsegg-Nygård. So I've got one half of Locked On NHL Prospects, Sebastian here to come and tell me all about him. So I'm just going to get straight into my conversation with Sebastian. The Blue Jackets might end up getting at least one more first-round pick in this draft, depending on how stupid other GMs want to be, whether they want to trade with Jarmo Kekalainen. So Michael Brandsegg-Nygård is a big Norwegian winger. He is not likely to be available in the 2 to 5 range, would be my guess for the Blue Jackets, but he could be available later on in the first round. So I've got Sebastian back again to talk about more European wingers. So let's just kind of get started off. What about? I know that Brandsegg-Nygård is a player that you really like in this draft. What exactly do you like about this player? Why is he such an exciting prospect for you?
He plays a commendable style. Like whichever team ends up drafting him, he's going to become a fan favorite in whatever role he lands in, as long as the expectation for him is not to be like one of your top offensive drivers on the team. He is a super effective defensive winger, probably the best one in this draft class in my viewing so far of the 2024 class. He plays in the Allsvenskan, which is the second tier of pro hockey in Sweden, and he's been regularly trusted with top 6 minutes for Mora this entire season, despite his production being super slow up until very recently. I think through his first about 20 games or 23 games, he had 2 goals and 3 or 4 points. It was really limited, but despite that, he was still being fed these top 6 minutes because he's an excellent possession winger. He's going to minimize chances against in the defensive zone. He's very good at protecting possession, getting it towards the offensive zone, and then doing whatever is needed with his entire team together to get the puck into the net. He's very team focused, very team oriented, which makes him very trusted by coaches. And ever since the World Junior Championships, where I quite liked his performances actually for Norway, where he was a lot less committed defensively in order to be the team's go-to offensive weapon and goal scorer. He was really able to show off his goal scoring abilities, and he has a really wicked shot when he wants to use it. And since coming back from that tournament, he's been put into a real offensive role for Mora. He's still been playing his second to first line minutes, playing between 15 and 20 a night. But since coming back, he has garnered in 7 games, one of which he only logged 4 minutes because he had a bit of an injury in the middle of the game. But in those 7 games, he's garnered 7 points, and one of those games was barely even a game played, and that was up from the 4 points he had in the 23 games beforehand. So he's really stepped it up since the World Junior Championships, and he was already perennially around my top 10 before the World Juniors even started. did. So I'm just getting more excited with this player the more viewings I'm getting here. And yeah, he plays with a real level of intensity. He's really intelligent in how he applies pressure, constantly adapting. He's a really good penalty killer, so you add a lot of versatility in that way. He's really solid on the power play. He can either be a trigger man, or it can be a net front, or it can be a bumper. He's played multiple roles there quite effectively in my viewings. And it's that versatility, that adaptability, that ability to kind of just plug holes in a lineup. Also within a top six that makes him so special. So while you're not likely going to get like a perennial first liner who's putting up a point a game with MBN, what you are going to get is a top six winger who long term is going to be able to fill any type of hole you have in your top six. Whether you need a power forward on your top line, whether you need a puck protector or a possession focused winger, if you need a defensive winger to kind of insulate some like high octane offensive forwards, whatever role you need him to, he can kind of adapt and into those and play them really, really effectively. And that makes him a fascinating player, and one that I think any NHL team is going to be pretty excited to add. Like he's a 6'1", a 200-pound right winger who is, as I said, he's been playing some excellent pro hockey this season already, and he was playing some solid pro hockey in the Allsvenskan last season already too, as a D-1. So he's a player that just brings so much to a team, and certainly the mold that NHL teams are also going to favor, perhaps even more so than public scouts. So while in public rankings he's mainly found in that like 8 to like 18 range, I wouldn't be shocked if he ends up going a little bit higher into like that, maybe 6 to 12 is kind of where I could see him falling. But the recent Bob McKenzie ranking, which had him at 20th, really surprised me, because he really is a prototypical like NHL scout's favorite type of forward, and I like him a lot, and he's certainly around. He's been around like 10th or 12th overall for me all year.
In just a minute, I've got more of my conversation with Sebastian on Brandsegg-Nygård, but first I've got to tell you guys about FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers are going to get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150 if your bet wins. So literally just go find the heaviest favorite. It doesn't have to be basketball. It could be hockey. It could be college sports. It could be swimming, polo, lacrosse, NASCAR, anything. Find the heaviest favorite, put $5 on it, and if you win, you're going to get $150 that you can spend on anything you want. Quick bets. They've got live same-game parlays. They've got exclusive props and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel, official sportsbook of the NBA, and also us, the Locked On Podcast Network. I always feel like World Juniors are, obviously you can't base all of your scouting on like one tournament, but I feel like there's a little bit more wiggle room when you look at high tier players on countries like Norway or Latvia, or countries that are kind of not the big hitters, and I'm like, okay, can he perform against the best 18-year-olds that Canada and America and Czechia now have to offer? And it seems like he kind of held up against the ranking. So it's always really interesting to look at like high tier Norwegian players specifically. I think are so fascinating because they don't really have a pro league in their own country that's, can be held up against, the USHL or Major Junior or even like the Liga in Finland.
Yeah.
So it's,
for sure.
I don't know, I'm really intrigued by Brandsegg-Nygård as a player.
He's fascinating, and while watching Norway at the World Juniors, another player on that team who's also draft eligible, Stian Solberg, is likely also going to be a top 45 or top 50 selection in this draft class, and he's gotten me to actually watch some Norwegian Pro League hockey tape, and You are not wrong. It is painful. Like it is not a great league to scout. It is not the best time. It is entertaining in its absurdity at times. Like the amount of time and space available, like it feels like the ice surface is like twice the size of the European regular surface because of just how much time and space every player on the ice has. It can be entertaining, but yeah, like Brandsegg-Nygård is a player that I think at the World Juniors, what he showed me specifically, like I already knew that he was this like high-end defensive winger who had like all these possession skills in terms of holding up play and protecting the puck, and making the simple play to retain possession. Like he's anything but selfish in Allsvenskan with his like, against pro competition. But at the World Juniors, I saw a player who felt confident enough to like kind of take the game by its horns a little bit, not in terms of like dominating it to win the game, because again, this is Norway at the World Junior Championship. That was not the expectation for him to do, but he did really make the job tough for some of the really good teams he was playing against. Like I remember, especially against the US, he scored a goal, even two, maybe, I forget, in that game, but he hit the back of the net, and he was just pushing the pace offensively. He was just a freight train going right up the ice, did not really care what was standing in his way. He would get around it or through it in some way, shape, or form, and then he'd really rifle off his shot. And his ability to not only put the puck in the net, but to also judge when to release that puck, even on like almost solo rushes that he was on at times in that tournament, was really impressive to me, where I saw a lot more versatility in his game that had been a bit more obscured in his professional games, just because he has to play more of that reserve defensive role, which he will also be playing at the NHL level. Like I think his Allsvenskan tape is a lot more like specific to what he will be in the NHL in all likelihood, if he's developed with his current toolkit really in mind. But what I love to see was just that he was able to adapt to the situation where it's like, okay, I am like the most skilled offensive player on my team. I'm going to change how I'm approaching these games. I'm not going to just try to shut down every play. I'm going to try to create and at least make the Norwegian fans stand up in their seats and have something to cheer about, right? Like even if we're not winning every game, like your goal at the World Junior Championships, if you're Michael Brandsegg-Nygård playing for Norway when they've just been promoted, is not to have the best expected goals differential for your team. That can't be your goal. That's not the idea. Not that any hockey players really think that way. That's very much like stat talk. But it's not just about minimizing chances or desperately trying to create the smallest smidgens of advantages. But you want to have some excitement. You want to have some thrill. And the fact that this seemingly like defensive and like capable but like reserved winger was able to come out of his shell in that way and show a different side of his game and his abilities was really promising to me, just because I was starting to, much as I appreciate him as a player, I was starting to pigeonhole him a little bit into that defensive role, and he's really blossoming out of that right now, which is a lot of fun to see and makes him a far more intriguing draft option come June.
What do you think? You talked a little bit about how he's not going to be like a point per game top line winger in the NHL, but like what do you see his ceiling as? Is he a guy that can play top line minutes? Is he a complementary piece, or do you think he's a guy that can kind of drive the second or third lines and be, you know, a really, really excellent third line winger? Or like where do you see him ending up? Obviously that depends on what team takes him and what they have already, but like what, in a perfect world, what is his ceiling, do you think?
I think in a situation where he's on a high-end contender and he hits his ceiling, I think the most comfortable kind of projection for him would be to be the number 4 forward, like second, playing like on the second line at even strength, but playing first line minutes because he'd be playing on both top special teams units. I think that would really be leveraging his versatility. He'd be able to step up in the lineup if there's an injury on the first line and kind of plug that hole. Because again, he's really, really the type of player that you want to plug holes with when they arise, because he can adapt to a situation so seamlessly. I think that at his best, he would be surrounded by two players that are more like dynamic than he is, bring an element of pace, which he also certainly has. and are kind of able to match his level of intensity. Like he's the type of player that I think really gets energy from being surrounded by energy as well. So if you have like a high pace, high octane offensive piece who needs a bit of defensive insulation and perhaps a player to get the puck to when they're under pressure and can just trust that they're going to maintain possession and keep the play going, that's the type of player that you want Michael Brandsegg-Nygård to kind of be. You want him in that type of role where he's able to really make the players around him better, because that is essential to what makes him so special, is that he elevates the players around him by making their lives so much easier and by just really seamlessly adapting to their styles. And that's something that I think often goes overlooked with players and their values, is just how adaptable they are to different types of line mates. Because if you end up being a player, like no matter how like skilled you may be, if you're like a second liner in the NHL, but you rely to be like impactful, you need to be surrounded by like these specific types of players in order to be at your best. It's going to really limit like your production. Is going to limit your development because you are relying on these outside factors. And with Michael Brandsegg-Nygård, because he's able to adapt so seamlessly to every situation and seemingly like he just thrives in whatever role he's thrust into, it makes him so valuable and consistent and dependable in a way that forwards aren't typically, right? Like you don't usually think of forwards as like dependable if they're wingers. Like centers are usually like a good two-way center would be your dependable piece. I think Michael Brandsegg-Nygård could be that type of like stabilizing force inside of a top six and really be able to plug holes left, right, and center. So that makes him really interesting. And again, if he's able to continue to develop his offensive game by working on the goal scoring element, if he's able to become a trigger man on top of everything else that he already is, then you're looking at a really exciting player, and certainly one who's a lot more multifaceted than other goal scorers in this draft class, like the Cole Eisermans of the world, for instance.
Yeah, that's a name we're gonna have fun discussing at some point when I do the Yzerman profile, because a lot of people have a lot of opinions about him. Gonna get back to my conversation with Sebastian in just a second. Before we do that, though, it's almost the halfway point in the season, or we're past the halfway point actually for the Blue Jackets, and they are what they are, but regardless of where we are in the current standings, I want to remind you that you could win big playing daily fantasy hockey on Sleeper, the official daily fantasy app of the Locked On NHL Network. They're our number one choice for all daily fantasy sports, but especially daily fantasy hockey. And with Sleeper, you can win 100 times your cash in those daily fantasy hockey contests. All you have to do is pick whether guys like McDavid, Crosby, Ovechkin, Matthews are going to record more or less than their Sleeper projections for things like goals, assists, saves, plus minus, and more in a given game. To win 100 times your money on Sleeper, all you need to do is correctly predict the outcome of 8 of those player stats. That's right. All you need to do is guess 8 player stats correctly, and you could win 100 times your money. So start paying attention and nail your picks so you can start winning big. Use promo code LOCKEDONNHL. You get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Terms and conditions apply. That's code LOCKEDONNHL. See Sleeper terms of use for details and locational availability. Normally, I don't like to ask this question. I used to ask it all the time and then kind of grew out of asking it. But is there an NHL player that fits kind of what you think Brandsegg-Nygård will be?
I think if he leans into the goal scoring element of his game, Anders Lee would be a name that can come to mind, maybe, of like a really rock solid kind of power forward goal scorer, but with more of a defensive impact. I can't remember like scouting Anders Lee in depth. I forget how impactful he is in his defensive zone, but in terms of the offensive zone play, at least I think that would be like a bit of like the offensive ceiling as a goal scorer. Like maybe a less scary version of Valeri Nichushkin could come to mind. Like he doesn't have the same like just like 6'4" massive like built like a tree trunk frame, but he is big. Like Michael Brandsegg-Nygård is 6'1".
Yeah, 6'1" at 17
he's quite big, right? Yeah. Like he is well built. Like his physicality is certainly a strength in his game, not a weakness. But but I'm thinking of like a possession winger who puts up really good defensive metrics and makes some really subtle but skilled offensive plays to not only facilitate the cycle for like the highly dynamic players on that Colorado Avalanche team, but to really make life really annoying for the team that they're playing against, like really getting involved in like net front battles. And Michael Brandsegg-Nygård can do all of that quite well. So I'd say maybe a less mean version of Valeri Nichushkin could be a conceivable upside for him.
I mean, I wouldn't be mad about either of those options. I feel like Anders Lee loves to score goals against the Blue Jackets in a way that
nice.
feels like a personal attack at this point. So maybe that's just my bias for Anders Lee, where I'm like, yeah, he always scores really annoying big goals against the Blue Jackets. But I like Val Nichushkin a lot as a prospect. And yeah, I would be happy if either of those guys ended up being a prospect for the Blue Jackets. Let's finish up. I just have one unrelated question to Brandsegg-Nygård. Looking at the Blue Jackets forward prospect right now, is there anyone on there that you think like is like where would you put Brandsegg-Nygård in the ranking of Blue Jackets forward prospects right now? Because I feel like there's less A+ prospect in the forward pool than in the defensive pool, for example, but I feel like there's a lot of like maybe hidden gems in there. So like where would you rank him in terms of, Luca Del Barbaluz, James Malatesta, Luca Pinelli, Gavin Brindley, I feel like hits the top of the list immediately.
Yeah.
But like where would he fall?
Like Brindley is quite clearly the gem of this prospect pool. Of course, if we're not including Adam Fantilli. But oof, that is, yeah, like Michael Brandsegg-Nygård and Gavin Brindley would be the top two for sure. I think the order of that, I think I'd have to lean Gavin Brindley. Like I've been the biggest fan of Gavin Brindley for the longest time, and he's just gotten better this year since I've stopped watching him quite as much as I did last year in the draft cycle. And whenever I've peered back into Michigan or the U.S. World Juniors team, he's just been incredible and wonderful to watch. Like Luca Pinelli is my favorite prospect in this pool because I've basically watched him. I watched his OHL debut. I basically watched every home game he played for Ottawa in the OHL, and I've been a massive fan of him for that entire stretch. So I'm really excited about him as a prospect, and I think that Columbus is a great system for him to kind of evolve in. William Whitelaw has a ton of upside and skill, obviously, but no one other than Gavin Brindley can match Michael Brandsegg-Nygård in like NHL like likelihood of like becoming an impactful piece in the NHL or even the upside. Like I think that Brindley is the only other forward in here that was like a very clear top 15 draft eligible talent. I don't think anyone else in here would scream quite first round to me. I know that like of course the likes of Jordan Dumais are quite celebrated by certain circles, but I still think is quite limited in terms of the overall potential upside. Like I don't think he's going to be a long-term like top 6 contributor, and I would love to be wrong. He's a player that I've tried very hard to cheer for in terms of the likelihood ever since he crossed my path, because he's a lot of fun, but he's the type of player that certainly makes the most of every single weakness in the QMJHL and that level, and just needs to refine everything else against higher competition, and it's just not coming for him in the Q. But yeah, Michael Brandsegg-Nygård would certainly be a standout forward prospect in this prospect pool. Like even comparing him to defensive prospects, like I think apart from the obvious like Jiricek and like maybe Matejchuk, you wouldn't have a higher end prospect in your system than Michael Brandsegg-Nygård. Like he'd be certainly towards the top, and there's a reason that he's being talked about in this like top 15 range, because he really is a very, very good player who projects as a long-term impactful piece in an NHL top 6, or at the very least middle 6.
So for people who want to maybe learn more about Brandsegg-Nygård specifically, or prospect in general, they want to get your rankings, things like that, where can people find you and your work online?
For sure. I centralize all my work on Twitter. So you can check on Twitter, hi_Sebastian, all lowercase, and everything I do, I kind of post on Twitter. For more consistent updates and regular content, you're welcome to check out Locked On NHL Prospects. Like that, this is the show that I host alongside Hadi Kalikesh, and we talk about prospects for about 2.5 hours every single week. So you can tune in there. There's a very consistent stream of content, and we ask each other many questions of prospects, have kind of bicker around a little bit about our differences, but it's always a fun time, and it's kind of a prospect hanging out space, and it's always a lot of fun. So if you want to check that out, please do, and like leave a comment on recent videos with questions. We might address them in future episodes. But yeah, like for my personal work, Twitter is where everything's centralized. And if you want like big time rankings, Dobber Prospects, go follow Dobber Prospects. We are going to have our midterm rankings coming out in the next 2 weeks, and that's very exciting. So we'll see what that list looks like. It's going to be a top 64, and we're going to delve into a lot of prospects that haven't been talked about all that much publicly yet. So that'll be a lot of fun too.
I love midterm ranking seasons because it's just an excuse for all of the prospects to argue.
It's great.
And
Yeah.
as someone who is like very much on the fringes of knowing about prospects, like I know just enough to make me dangerous. I enjoy watching them tweet pointedly at each other about like, well, I think this player has more upside than this player. But thanks for coming.
He's actually a top 15 talent, not just a top 17 talent. What are you talking about? Yeah, it's beautiful. Gotta love it.
It's a lot of fun. I enjoy it a lot. Thanks for coming to hang out, Sebastian. Can confirm Locked On NHL Prospects is one of my first listens of the day. So if you're looking for a little bit more prospect content in your life, and the Blue Jackets have a ton of exciting prospects, go check Locked On NHL Prospects out, and maybe make them your second listen of the day, because I'm going to go ahead and assume that Locked On Blue Jackets is your first listen of the day. And that's all I've got for you today. Tomorrow, we are going to take a look at tonight's game against the Ottawa Senators. Hopefully looking at a win, but we'll see. Thank you for listening. Thank you for making us your first listen of the day. You can find us anywhere you get your podcast. You can find us on YouTube. You can find us on Sirius XM. You can find me on Twitter at _Jacob Foster, JAKOBFORSTER. You can find the show at LO_Blue Jackets. If you have comments, questions, criticisms, you can email us at lockedonbluejackets@gmail.com. Thank you once again for listening, and until tomorrow, make sure you stay locked on.